This is a story about how a game rental back in 1994 changed the gaming life of FeralInferno forever.
FeralInferno, the digital beast. He's our link to the past. Feel the heat as he takes the stage. With every button press, he takes command in his own virtual wonderland.
Hey, it's FeralInferno, and we're back with our Game of the Year series. Going back to the year 1994, I remember taking a trip to a grocery store called Wegmans, and they had a game rental section. There was two things I would do anytime I'd go to Wegmans. I'd go running to one of two sections, and they were right next to each other so I could visit both. It was either the comic book stand or it was the game rental area. And this was a great Friday night. I went to the game rental area and I was looking at all the Super Nintendo games. And I was just trying to decide, what game do I want to rent for this weekend, right? This is a very important decision, right? This is your entire weekend. This is in the winter time, right? It's still cold out. You can't go outside and really play. I had to have a good game. There weren't a lot of games that I was looking for that day. However, there were two games that popped into the view and said, maybe I might want to play these games. One was Lagoon. And I looked at the back and I'm like, hey, this kind of looks like a Legend of Zelda kind of game, top-down view. You got the 3D action kind of field there. Looked very Zelda-esque, but something about it just didn't seem right? It didn't look like a game I'd really like. I don't know why, it was a hunch. And then there was another game. A game with a pink cover, like a hot pink cover, right? And this is like, back in the 90s and you're supposed to be a tough guy, right? Pink guys don't like the color pink. Like, God, what is this, like this hot pink colored game? Like, it's just got letters on it, but there was a sword, so swords are cool. So I was like, hey, maybe this game is good. And I looked at the back and I'm like, oh, okay. I remember seeing this game in Nintendo Power, and I remembered a very specific screenshot and some of the artwork. It flooded into my brain, and I'm like, man, this was a game that I had thought about playing. But this was also a turn-based RPG, and I had played Dragon Warrior, which I do love now. I love the original Dragon Warrior now, but back then I was young, I didn't really understand it too well, it was very complicated. So did I want to take a chance and rent this game? Right? Am I going to take a chance and rent this game and this ruin my entire weekend? Well, I took that chance. And wow, I'm glad I did. I made the right choice. We rented that fated Friday night in 1994. Final Fantasy II for the Super Nintendo. Man, Final Fantasy II. This game totally reshaped my thoughts on video games. I mean, I love The Legend of Zelda, which was RPG-esque, right? I played Zelda 1, Zelda 2, and Zelda, A Link to the Past, the third game. But what about this game, Final Fantasy II? I was very, very apprehensive about renting this, but that screenshot came back to my head. I remembered looking at that in my 5th grade class. I remember I was sitting down there and I was looking at Nintendo Power when I should have been, paying attention to class. But I was looking at that screenshot and it was just like, man, something about it really spoke to me. I remember like Rydia, really like that character, the sprite, it looked really cool, and the Kane sprite as well, like the guy in a dragon armor, that looked really cool. So I said, let's try it out. Let's take the risk. I remember taking this home. And my parents and my brother, I think they went to some family event. I don't remember. And I did have a little bit of a headache and I didn't really want to go. And I wanted to play the game. So I laid down and then, they all left. And maybe about 10, 15 minutes later, I said, you know what? I'm getting out of bed. I popped this into the Super Nintendo and I was hooked. I was hooked immediately. There was this story that unfolds, right? It opens, even the opening story, right? So you got the airships, you got this dramatic music playing, you got the 5 airships, the Red Wings going up in the screen. And then, like, you're robbing a crystal from these wizards. I'm like, whoa, am I the bad guy? What's going on here? Are we playing as the bad guy here? I was so confused. And then you start seeing the doubts that the main character has. And you meet with the king and you get expelled, and it plays, you're leaving with your best friend, and this dramatic music starts playing as you leave the castle, and the text crawl comes up with the castle scenery in the background. What an amazing experience. I had never experienced anything like this. This was a true narrative in a video game. This was amazing. I had never seen anything like it before. And I spent that entire night playing Final Fantasy II. And it was a little bit rough at first because I'm trying to learn these new mechanics, the turn-based mechanics, having party members, right? Then Dragon Warrior 1, you had the one character, that was it. It was kind of like first person almost, right? Like you saw the monster appear on the screen, one slime draws near, and it's one-on-one. This was like multiple enemies, multiple characters with different abilities. And what really helped this game shine wasn't so much the graphics, right? The graphics, let's be real, was kind of more like glorified NES graphics, right? They were like really awesome NES graphics, super colorful. They looked nice, but they weren't blowing you away. Other than I will say, the enemy sprites. The enemy sprites were really cool. They were very cool designs, and the character portraits. But the graphics wasn't the main draw of this game. The music was phenomenal. Loved the music. Music was great. It really set the tone of the game for you. Sad scene had sad music. Pensive scene had pensive music. The big battles you had with the four fiends, right? The dramatic music that you'd have, the different boss, whether it was a regular battle music, the boss battle music, or the four fiends music, or even the final boss music. It had an elevation of an anxiety that went with the boss battle music. But where did the game shine? The story was fantastic as well, but where it really shone was with its characters. The characters were just phenomenal and so fleshed out. It was amazing. You have Cecil, your main character, who goes on a road of redemption. You start out as the bad guy and become the good guy of the story. You've got Kane, the conflicted best friend. You've got Rosa, the love interest. You've got Rydia, the orphaned child that you accidentally victimize. You've got Young, the karate master. You've got Edge, the ninja. You even got Edward, the spoony bard, who has, not the greatest character in the world, but he's a unique character in the game, right? He's a very unique character. You've got Tella the mage. You got Palom and Porum, the twin child mages from Mysidia. So Sid, you can't forget Sid. Sid the mechanic. He's kind of the comic relief of the story, and he's helps you get to the airships. So many great characters in Final Fantasy II, and that's what really connected me with the games, especially Cecil's story of redemption. That's what really kept me going in this game, and I rented this game not just that one night, but I kept renting it over and over and over again until I beat the game. And luckily my save file kept being preserved on each rental. We didn't lose our spot in the game. Very lucky to not have that happen, because when you rented RPG, you never knew if you were going to have your save file again when you rented it the second time. But we got lucky and we didn't lose our save file, so that was very important to go through the entire story. But that didn't stop. I didn't stop renting it there. I kept renting this game over and over and over again. After that, I kept playing through it. I played through this game so many times. Just on the Super Nintendo cartridge alone, I played through it so many times. That speaks to the testament of how great these characters were. How the story just was. It wasn't overcomplicated. A lot of these stories we have now are like super complicated and very convoluted. It wasn't oversimplified either. It was kind of like just in the middle. It was just right, especially for the time. In 1994, even though this game came out prior to 1994, this is when I got to experience it. This was the RPG that I needed to get into the genre. For those not aware, Final Fantasy II on the Super Nintendo in the US was actually Final Fantasy IV in Japan because we didn't get the original 2 and 3 on the NES. As we fast forward through time, many new versions of Final Fantasy IV come out, including fan-translated versions of Final Fantasy IV in Japan. We get the awful, beyond awful, Final Fantasy IV PlayStation version that came bundled with the PlayStation version of Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy Chronicles. Very excited to get it, but then it was very let down with how buggy the PlayStation version was, and along with the loading times. And then we got the Final Fantasy IV Advance version. This was a great version of Final Fantasy, and I loved it. It had extra dungeons in it. You could recruit your characters that you lose throughout the game at the end, so a little bit extra. You have a different experience. This was a very unique way to play Final Fantasy IV. And it even tells you on the back that this was previously released as Final Fantasy II on the Super Nintendo, enhanced with all new features. So cool that they put that on here to explain to fans, like, hey, it's even got the the little pink cover there from the Super Nintendo to let fans know, like, hey, here, sorry for the mix-up back in the day. But these were all great versions of the game, but they didn't really change the game all too terribly much. They were all kind of like enhanced ports, and maybe one had a cinema scene in it, maybe they had extra dungeons. But the game, as great as Final Fantasy IV was, it didn't live up to the age that we were going into. We were getting into voice acting and 3D graphics, and it just didn't age well. Some Super Nintendo games have aged very well, but this was an early Super Nintendo game, and like we talked about before, it looked like more like a glorified NES game. But in 2008, 14 years after I experienced Final Fantasy II on the Super Nintendo, which was really Final Fantasy IV, I got to re-experience Final Fantasy IV again in a very powerful way. And that was Final Fantasy IV, the 3D remake on the Nintendo DS. I remember I was in college at the time, and I came back home, and I'm on the computer, and I'm in my apartment, and I go on a bunch of different sites I had all bookmarked, right? And there were some video game sites on there looking for video game news. And I remember seeing screenshots on RPG Gamer's website back in the day for Final Fantasy IV. It was the anniversary, we had the anniversary of Final Fantasy coming up. And this was one of the games that was coming out for this anniversary. And I was like, man, I hope this comes out in the US. Because this was a time when we weren't guaranteed to get all the RPGs here in the US. And it was just a Japanese release at first, but eventually we did get a US announcement, and I followed this game, all the screenshots, all the artwork, and it was great to finally have, real, kind of cool artwork for the characters that was kind of re-envisioned in CGI. And this game, as much as Final Fantasy II introduced me to RPGs and blew me away, this blew me away all over again. And how can that be? Isn't it the same game? Yes and no. And that's why it still qualifies as a game of the year, even though we got this. These are both game of the years, but they're the same game. Didn't we say we weren't going to do that? This is the exception, and the reason why it's such an exception is because this transformed the game. This is how a remake should be done. We see some remakes that we either see enhanced ports, where an enhanced port is nice and all, but it doesn't do a whole lot, right? Maybe we see with Final Fantasy IV Advance. This is essentially an enhanced port, right? So you see a little extra few features here and there. Very, it's cool, it's nice, but it's still the same game. Whereas Final Fantasy IV on the DS, it transformed it in terms of the graphics, in terms of the voice acting, upgrading the music, adding and fleshing out a little bit to the story that we didn't know about, fixing up the script, adding more dialogue where dialogue is a little more restricted because of memory requirements on the cartridges back in the day. We saw the same game transformed. And this is one of my problems with Final Fantasy VII Remake. It was a remake, yes, but it wasn't exact. It wasn't it wasn't so true to the game. This was true to the story and characters of Final Fantasy IV, but it improved upon it in such a great way. This is a masterpiece of a game and a remake. And to me, this is the greatest remake that has ever been made. Because it's a tough feat to go in there, to try to be creative, try to transform it into something, and still retain its soul. That's amazing. That's an amazing accomplishment. And going through a game, now we talked about this during our 1994 segment. I played through Final Fantasy II on the Super Nintendo numerous times through many rentals. I can't count the amount of times that I've played through Final Fantasy II on Super Nintendo, whether it was through rentals when I eventually did get it for my birthday, or playing through emulation even. I played through this game so much, or perhaps it was playing through it on all the other versions that we've gotten. It was amazing that I could still feel such a connection and freshness to the game and the emotion that came from playing Final Fantasy IV again. Hearing Mount Hobbs' theme, hearing the theme of love, hearing our characters speak with great voice acting, right? Voice acting can be really hit or miss and they can ruin an experience. This is what I expected the characters to sound like. And it answered the age-old question with the voice acting. Is it Cecil or Cecil? We found out I was right. It was Cecil. We even got the pronunciation for a character we all thought was named Yang. Y-A-N-G. Yang, right? It seems pretty easy. It actually was pronounced Young. Young. When they first got to, when we were going through Mount Hobbs, and we got Young and his karate students all fighting the bomb enemies, and they says my name is Young. I was like, whoa! For 14 years, I was calling this guy Yang. So that was cool to kind of say, this was the actual pronunciation of his name. That was so cool. And it really brought all the characters alive. And this was a special experience. And I've actually played through Final Fantasy IV DS multiple times as well. Many times. I want to say probably 6-7 times I played through this. And it's not a super long RPG. But, you're looking at, maybe anywhere from 30 to 40 hours playing through it. And they added a lot of good stuff to this where it didn't feel like too much added filler. They added a little custom summon character that you can customize and draw a face on. It wasn't anything you needed to do, but it was just a fun little thing that was there. So that was cool, right? So you saw that. And then because there's voice acting in it, you wouldn't really be able to change the names, right? But there was a character called Naming Way that you'd find in each town. And be like, hey, you want to change your character's name? And you could change your character's names as you went along the story. But with the voice acting, that's kind of hard to do. So they changed Naming Way into all these other ways. I think he was Mapping Way. He's he gives you the map, right? Or he had all these other just different various names. It was he had all these different themes to him. He was a cool character, very cool little character. They made this little side nothing character, and they made a cute little fun thing to do with him. That was really cool to see that. They added some extra bosses on the moon that you could go fight as well. So that was nice. Have some extra the challenge bosses. One of them I was not able to defeat. One of them was very difficult. And it added New Game Plus, which gave this new life. And one of the cool things about New Game Plus in this was that a new addition to the game as well was you get what's called character augments, skill augments. And with the skill augments, you could get some of the abilities that other characters that you would lose on your team, right, that you don't get back. So you can add those abilities to your final roster, or any of the characters that you wanted to actually give them to. So maybe you wanted Edward's Sing ability, right? So you could get this, maybe it was Sing you wanted, or maybe it was, the twin magic ability from Palm and Porum, right? That was such a cool ability, the twin magic, and then you could assign twin to any of the characters. So if you gave twin to 2 different characters, you could do different spells. So they were able to add new twin magic as well, and you could have different combinations, different characters, but you also had to choose wisely because you could only go through the game 3 times with the New Game Plus. And then it wouldn't carry over anymore after that. So you had to choose wisely or start over to get new combinations. So they really incentivized you to play through the game multiple times. A game that I haven't seen really do that since the likes of Chrono Trigger, with all their various endings that you could get, which you were enabled to do, pretty well because of New Game Plus. And that's what they did with Final Fantasy IV. So they were taking a game that I loved so much growing up, and then added essentially one of Chrono Trigger's features of replaying an RPG and having a purpose to replay it again, where it doesn't feel like a slog to do it or a chore. Like, this was fun. I was able to plan out like what I wanted to give all my characters. Man, I could gush about this game all day long. Yeah, Final Fantasy IV. Man, on the DS, such a fantastic remake. I was worried about this, to tell you the truth, too, because I was like, hey, is this going to let me down? Is it going to ruin the nostalgia? No, it further increased my nostalgia for this game. And that's why when we did our other Game of the Year videos, we grouped a lot of the years together, I don't think anybody noticed this. Nobody commented that we skipped 1994 and 2008. It was all for a purpose. It wasn't an accident. So that is why our 1994 Game of the Year is Final Fantasy II. And our 2008 Game of the Year, Final Fantasy IV. What tremendous experiences. If you haven't played through Final Fantasy IV, you really can't go wrong with most of the releases. I personally recommend Final Fantasy IV on the DS. There is other ways to play the game as well. There's, of course, the PSP remaster version. So it's kind of like an very enhanced port of the 2D version of Final Fantasy. So for those that wanted the 2D experience, they had that on the PSP with much updated graphics. It looked great. I enjoyed that as well. Or if you wanted the more 3D graphics, you had that option on the DS. You've also now got the Pixel Remaster as well. That's available on all modern consoles, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5. Thank you so much for joining us for this very special Game of the Year series that spans 14 years. What? Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next one.